Good Monday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille Show. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you kindly for joining us. We're live in Charlottesville, across Albemarle County, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world, here on the I Love CVille Network, Ting Fiber Internet, the crazy fast internet that powers the I Love CVille Network. And folks, we thank Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Integrative Medicine for being a part of the program as well. Who's got your back? Dr. Wagner has your back. And our friends at Skooma Boutique Dispensary and many partners that you see on screen help make this show very, very, very possible. We have a lot to cover today. It is going to be a well-watched show, we know, with the mayor of Charlottesville, Lloyd Snook, in the house, a man we have tremendous respect for, and a man who I think has done a heck of a job of making policy and some of his foundation for leadership in our jurisdiction more approachable by joining many members of the media. We have heard him on Courtney Stewart's show, right. Charlottesville Right Now on 1070 WINA, offering some insight into where we stand as a city. And today we'll spend hopefully about an hour with the mayor of Charlottesville discussing the budget. This is where the rubber meets the road, and Mayor Snook is one of 5 people that are going to help offer decision-making into how we spend about $190 million of not only taxpayer money, but the money we utilize to keep the jurisdiction afloat. Judah's our director. Let's go to the two-shot. Let's welcome the mayor of Charlottesville to the program. Happy Valentine's Day, Mayor Snook.
Thank you. Thank you.
You look sharp. Thank you for joining us.
Got the red shirt on for the occasion.
And the tie.
Hey.
Was that intentional?
Yes, it was, actually.
Me too. Me too. What did you, you and your beautiful better half been married for quite some time.
42 years.
42 years. Did you guys do any Valentine's Day celebratory endeavors?
No, of course, yesterday was Super Bowl Sunday, which is not really a great holiday for me because I didn't care about either the Bengals or the Rams. But I did a little something special for dinner. Made some cioppino.
Oh, what's cioppino?
Cioppino is a seafood stew that is basic. It's an Italian thing. Scallops, shrimp, some cod, some crab, tomato, and so on. And some homemade focaccia, and So not only does Mayor Snook lead through fantastic policy, not only does he have the voice of an angel, not only is he one of the best esquires in the Commonwealth, but he's a chef as well. Yeah, I guess you could say that. And for dessert, we had lemon shortbread with berries on top and ice cream. So. Anyway.
Very nice, sir. Very nice.
Tonight there are a few other exotica coming.
Oh, I like that. We'll leave it at that. A few other exotica coming from Mayor Snook. Welcome,
the
Scott.
X is important there.
I get that. I heard that. Thank you for emphasizing that. Scott Aaronworth, hello. Janet Knight, hello, who I believe might be watching at Rapture. Nicholas Erpy, hello. All right, so I'm going to get out of your way. This is an important time. Budget time. We'll start elementary and open-ended here. Budget time and what it means for residents of Charlottesville, Virginia. Well,
this budget time is particularly important because we've got a lot of economic cross currents that are really hitting the city. The first thing that we are looking at in terms of governance is the raises that we have to give to our people, just to keep them from going to other places where they're giving raises. There's a lot of wage inflation right now. I think it's probably going to be a fairly short-lived bump in the road. I don't think that this is projected to be the beginning of a 5-year, 10-year inflationary period, but it's a coming out of COVID kind of a thing. It's kind of how do you get people to come out of the sort of semi-retirement that they were experiencing during COVID to get them to come back to work? We had that problem in particular at the end of the year. We realized that we were down, 20 plus police officers. We were down a lot of public works employees. If you wonder why the streets weren't getting plowed as fast as you might like, or why the tree debris wasn't getting picked up as fast as you might like, we had 30-some public works employees out with COVID stuff. So there are a lot of things going on there. We need And we decided at the end of the last year that we were going to take a budget surplus that we had from the previous year of fiscal year that ended June 30th. And this is money that in some cases did better than expected on tax revenues. In many cases, much of the money was saved because we weren't paying it out to people who had left. And so we decided to put more of that into raises mid-year. And the mid-year raises were roughly 6% and plus some bonuses in an effort to keep the people we've got. What we were seeing was that our best folks were getting hired away. That was not a good thing. We had to stop that. So we've got to figure out how to integrate this need to keep our workforce intact and to grow it back to where it ought to be to do the things we need to do, recognizing that of course has a bottom line effect for taxpayers. And taxpayers are sitting there saying, hey, why are you giving the city staff 6% raises when I didn't get anything more than 2% out of my Social Security? And the answer quite simply is we have to pay what we have to pay. And we then have to figure out what we're going to do around that constraint. That's the biggest problem we've got. We will have about $14.8 million in additional revenue in the coming fiscal year we're projecting. And we've got about $14.4 million in expenses necessary just to keep us where we are. That's before we hire the first extra person. That's before we start the next new program. So we don't have very much room to play with. And the budget that we've got right now, or the working numbers we're dealing with right now, that involve no tax increase, only the 12% assessment increase, gets us to a point where we're just holding our own. And so the tension that we've got now is, do we try to get any additional funds? Are there programs that we ought to be cutting? How can we possibly get to the point where we can do some of the things that we know we need to do, we just haven't been able to get to them? And that's what we're going to be struggling with for the next month and a half.
The raises for staff seem like an absolute no-brainer to me. The competition, jurisdictional competition for human capital has never been stiffer. We saw that with school bus drivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially during the pandemic. And to stabilize the organization, a phrase that's been bandied around with counselors, with media, and with citizenry alike. To stabilize the organization, we have to have bodies and jobs and seats. And to do that, you got to pay them well. That seemed like a no-brainer to me. What starts getting the community not up in arms, but engaged even more is increased taxes.
Yeah.
10-cent real estate tax rate increase.
Suggested.
Advertised. A 10-cent real estate tax rate increase at the same time, and this man lives in the city, so he's going to get stung by this just like all of us. At the same time that assessments on average in the city went up 12%.
Right.
And at the same time that
personally 17%. So I know I feel the pain.
So he feels the pain. At the same time that inflation is trending around 7%, is maybe concerning. Gets people worried.
It's very concerning.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I guess my take on this is a message to the community. You've touched on it already, on why this is being discussed. And then the follow-up question, which I'll get out of your way, would be, how do we keep this from massively gentrifying and pushing out our citizens on the financial margin out of Charlottesville?
Well, I guess I think there are a couple things to point out, and I'll probably forget the second one by the time I'm done with the first one. But anyway, the first thing to point out is that we have a number of things that have been identified through previous efficiency studies, things that need to get done that aren't getting done. And the reason why they're not getting done in some cases is because we don't have the staff to do them. There are some things, for example, that need to happen in neighborhood development services. I think they're now officially calling themselves the Office of Community Solutions, which is fine. I'm happy with that renaming. I like the focus on community solutions as opposed to neighborhood development. But that's great. But it's going to take some people and some staff to do it. There are some other things. A climate coordinator. Or I'm not sure what the title is that we're looking for, but another person to deal with climate change issues that we've all five of us counselors have identified as something that we need to be focusing on. But we don't have the staff right now. The climate folks are actually within the Public Works Department, which if you think about it is kind of backwards. It's not providing a counterbalance to some of the gas division and so on. So there's some things like that have to happen, but we haven't been able to do that. So one of the tensions has been there are counselors who are saying if we want to do this, give us 3 or 4 different things. It's going to take a few $1 million to do it. So how do we get a few $1 million to do that? One of the things that I'm suggesting right now is rather than look at the real estate taxes, which are already going up by 11.9% on average. Assessments, yeah. Which, if the tax rate just stayed constant at 95 cents per $100, then the real estate tax revenues would go up 11.9%.
Correct.
Supposing we said, okay, the meals tax, which is currently at 6%, most cities in Virginia have a meals tax that's between 6 and 6, or either 6 or 6.5%. That seems to be sort of the sweet spot for most localities. If we just go to 6.5%, that's $1.2 million a year. That's about 1.5 cents equivalent on the real estate tax rate. It also would allow us to do some of the things that people have been saying, we really want to do this. We need to get off the dime on some of these things. And it would give us the ability to look at some of these additional projects that can really sort of start to move things forward. It's not, the $1.2 million would not be enough to go build affordable housing projects. One of the difficulties, or any of the other major capital funding things, one of the major constraints we're dealing with right now is trying to figure out how we can possibly afford the school reconfiguration proposal that has been tentatively approved. I say approved, but not yet fully budgeted. We're not committed to it at this point. It's $75 million to redo Buford. Is a huge amount of money.
And the first round from VMDO came over just over 80 million.
Right.
So 75 million in an inflationary time may be light.
Well, and so one of the issues that we don't know, we don't really understand what the inflation in the construction market looks like, because 3 months ago we were saying, it's just a temporary blip. Lumber prices are high. Transit issues and transportation issues and so on are causing a lot of disruptions in the supply chain, so on and so forth. We don't really know what that's going to look like, but the hope 3 months ago was, well, maybe those inflationary pressures will lessen. That does, in fact, happen sometimes. Who knows? But the issue, though, is I think to look at the reconfiguration, the reconstruction of the school, I don't really care for the purposes of this discussion whether you're talking about 60 or 70 or 80 million dollars. Even $60 million is more than we have a way to afford right now.
Okay.
If we were to look at what was originally projected as the cost to renovate, $22 million, that's within a range that we can figure out a way to handle out of the current capital budget. Or if we get approval from the General Assembly to ask the voters to approve a 1% sales tax add-on for school construction, that would give us the ability to build what the school board wants to build. If we don't get that, though, how do we handle a $75 million chunk in the middle of our capital budget when we have typically we've typically had about 10 to 12, maybe $15 million a year in bonds that we issue? The practical effect of a $75 million project would be that we would be basically hamstrung on any capital funding for the next 5 years after that. So if we go ahead with the $75 million in 2025 or 2024, then we're effectively taking ourselves out of virtually all capital funding until 2030. And that's a real problem for virtually every other facet of city operation. So one of those crucial decisions that we've got to make is, can we afford to commit to that? And if so, how are we going to make those numbers work? Personally, one option I see, although it flies in the face of this idea of, gee, we've got to be worried about construction, inflation, and so on, let's wait a year. We don't have
to. Reconfiguration. For
reconfiguration. Let's wait a year and we'll figure out what the lay of the land is as far as the lobbying efforts or whatever else we may have to do in order to get that sales tax authority.
Because you're saying the dynamic of the General Assembly could change. It could become more advantageous depending on party alignment of momentum backing a potential referendum where Charlottesville citizenship, I have a hard time with that word, where the citizens of Charlottesville would then potentially, in the next dynamic of General Assembly, have a chance to vote on a referendum to increase sales tax.
Well, yes. I mean, basically, here's the problem. When we, in October, were thinking that, we gave the go-ahead to the $75 million in October. At that point, frankly, I don't think any of us were imagining the
Youngkin effect.
Well, the Youngkin effect, not only Youngkin as governor, but also his coattails to bring along what is now suddenly a Republican majority in the House. And whereas we have a thin Democratic majority in the Senate that has approved the legislation necessary to move this whole thing forward, that's being killed right now in the House committee. So we're trying to work on that, and I'm hoping that we can avoid it becoming a purely partisan Democratic versus Republican issue, because the bipartisan committee that was meeting to try to figure out how to modernize schools statewide had agreed that this 1% sales tax ought to be implemented, that every locality ought to have the authority to do that. That's a bipartisan committee that's already out there. It is not in conflict. In fact, if anything, it, I think, furthers Governor Youngkin's goals of an emphasis on schools that, I mean, he would have a different focus in terms of what's being taught, but he's also not opposed to the capital improvement in the schools. And so we want to provide a way for that to happen in a way that doesn't affect the overall state budget.
But you would still need, for the sake of a talk show and a fair counterpoint, you would still need a referendum and
Absolutely.
Citizens to vote in favor of less money in their pocket.
Right. Well, and of course, about half of the sales tax revenue comes to us courtesy of out of
tourists.
Charlottesville people. Yeah. So it spreads the pain a little bit.
So basically the logic is, and it's interesting logic, I'm curious to see...
And let me just add, Jerry.
Sure.
So far, every jurisdiction that has had a referendum except one...
Has approved it. Okay.
And Charlottesville voters don't mind voting for education.
And especially with what is probably one of the most bipartisan issues, which is schools.
Yes.
And schools, he's saying, cross party lines, because anybody that's in a Republican or a Democrat has kids, and they want what's best for their kids. That's what he's saying.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, so I've got a lot that I want to throw to you. I'm curious to see how the Virginia Restaurant Tourism and Lodging Association will respond to a meals tax increase. Generally, this lobbying group, which is an influential one, is opposed to meals tax upticks. That's safe to say. But to your point, a meals tax increase on paper is less of a gentrification impact than a real estate tax rate increase.
Yes.
Real estate tax rate increase is the definition of pushing families, individuals, single-family households living on the financial margin out of the jurisdiction and making the community wealthier than ever before. Where meals tax, you can make the argument, is taking dollars out of tourist pocket as opposed to citizens of Charlottesville. That's what you're saying.
Well, yes, and I think we also, to emphasize that point, One of the neighborhoods that had the highest
10th and Page.
10th and Page, 25% increase in assessments. And that's ground zero for gentrification. Has been for a decade. Has been for 2 decades, in fact.
Certainly since Dairy Market and Dairy Central. That
has certainly seemed to have added to the pressure, but not exclusively, because that pressure had been there for years. And it's something we've dealt with, actually, going back into the 1980s. I can remember some votes on related issues. So that's happening. And of course, 10th and Page is an area that, if you go back 40 years, was almost entirely African American. And nowadays, depending on how you draw the boundary lines, it may be a third African American. So the gentrification has occurred. The question is it going to continue? Is it going to accelerate? And I'm afraid that if we end up increasing the real estate taxes, I mean, I talked to when I was knocking on doors a couple years ago, I talked to a fellow over in Fifeville who said, I've lived here so long, my taxes are now, my tax payments are now more than my mortgage. And so for him, African-American male, Fifeville, one of the places we're most concerned about, for him, taxes is a crucial issue. It's not just a black and white issue. It's really not even just a rich-poor issue, but it's an issue that hits a lot of people. And I talked to one, in fact, the Daily Progress yesterday had an editorial that referred to a conversation that I'd had with some folks who live in Charlottesville for 40 years. They're retirees, they're living on Social Security, they're living on pensions. They're not getting more than a couple of % increase. And if we're talking about increasing their taxes, their assessments were going up like 15%. If we're going to add another 10% on top of that, that's already the largest check they write every year. Is there 2 checks, each one of those checks, and for the taxes, and we're talking about raising that 25%.
It's an astronomical amount. So here's the question, and I asked this question of Councilor Michael Payne on Friday's show. I think it was Thursday's show. Excuse me. And this is a very pointed question. Are we paying, and it's a little metaphorical, the English major in me is weaving in some of that into this question. Are we paying for the sins of our predecessors today? We've had a lot of projects that were deprioritized or kicked down the proverbial curb that are now up for grabs or up for vote or up for decision making. Are you guys paying for the sins of our predecessors here?
To some extent, yes. I'll give you an example. The Dewberry Hotel. If that had been if they've gone ahead with the deal that had already been worked out, had already been preliminarily approved,
with the parking spaces,
and so on in 2017, that would be bringing us $1 million plus a year in tax revenues. Keith Woodard's project down on Water Street would have been at least $1 million in tax revenues. But in the interests of equity or whatever the logic was, those projects were scrubbed. They were fought. They eventually, in the case of Keith's project, he just said, "I'm tired of dealing."
You walked away with $2 million of underground infrastructure.
Right. Walked away from $2 million. That's it. So the point is, we're looking at about $2 million just from those 2 projects. $2 million a year. This year, coming online, one of the reasons why our assessments are going to be going up and why we're getting at $14.8 million, we're getting an extra $2 million a year, this fiscal year, this calendar year, because of the code building, because of 323 Garrett, and because of Apex Energy. That is improvement, real estate and improvements that are paying taxes this year. And we would be in a real big hurt if we didn't have that $2 million.
I'll throw this to you. And this is something I put out on our network. And Neil Williamson, we'll get to your comment, president of the Free Enterprise Forum. Got a couple TV stations watching you here, Mayor Snook on the program as well. I am fearful, having real estate in Charlottesville. I understand that you're a business owner. You have real estate in Charlottesville, multiple, residential and commercial. We understand that our business taxes that we're paying, which are paid in advance for the entire year, we have to project for the year, which is difficult. I'm fearful that we are...
If you're referring to B-poll?
Yeah.
B-poll taxes are paid on the basis of last year's revenues.
Right, but I'm paying B-poll...
In March.
Oh, right, you're right,
Yeah.
on 2021 revenue. But
Yeah.
the entire chunk is due in March.
Right.
Yeah, he's correct about that. So that's coming due now. I'm working on that with our CPA. I'm fearful that these decisions are going to not only expedite gentrification at a clip that we've perhaps never seen. You also have interest rates that are upticking now, and as interest rates uptick, that means people have less purchasing power to buy real estate. So that means they're often going to be more deep-pocketed individuals that purchase the real estate, because Charlottesville's not cheap, which we know. I identified the 7% inflation, the 12% on average real estate assessments, and maybe this tax rate increase of 10 cents, which is fairly substantial. I'm fearful that this school reconfiguration project, and I'm not scared to make unpopular statements on this network that's caused me to get heat. It's just the nature of, as you know, being a leader in the community. I'm fearful that this school reconfiguration project, 75 to 100 million bucks, is going to lead to gentrification where the people that benefit from the reconfiguration aren't the people we're trying to serve in 2022. That school reconfiguration, Walker's 10 years from now. Buford's a handful of years before this becomes truly reconfigured.
2026.
2026.
If we're on schedule, a reconfigured Buford would be open in 2026.
So 4 years at best for Buford, 10 years for Walker. We know construction often gets delayed. The folks that we're trying to serve to narrow this educational gap that widened during COVID, the folks we're trying to serve, likely before the projects are done, some of them will be pushed out because of these taxes. I'm sure you've thought about that.
A lot. And I'll add also my broader concern about the reconfiguration project is that we've talked about it in terms of equity and in terms of the achievement gap and everything else. The achievement gap typically has been measured in terms of third grade reading scores. That goes back at least 20 years to when Tim Kaine, running for either lieutenant governor or governor, I can't remember which race it was, pointed out that the Department of Corrections was basing their projections on how many beds they were going to need in prison based on third grade reading scores from 15 years earlier. Because they could see what has been popularly called the school to prison pipeline. And so the goal has been for a long time, at least the rhetorical goal has been, let's do something about that third grade reading score figure. Well, I don't see how reconfiguring at the fifth grade level does anything at all for the third graders. It doesn't. What they're hoping for is that we would then have a citywide pre-K at Walker, which, as you note, wouldn't actually be built until 2027, 28, somewhere in there. We don't even have a plan for that yet, but it's going to be a number of years down the road. All of this becomes doable if we get the sales tax increase, but if we don't get the sales tax increase, the costs on the educational front are so massive that it gobbles up our budget. We don't have a good way to do it. If we're going to be serious about things like, just to talk about the things we're getting letters about, bike trails, sidewalks, affordable housing, of course, is always a big
Friendship
one.
Court.
Friendship Court. Well, Friendship Court is baked in at this point.
Okay.
But what isn't is like the $2 million that they would need to do the MACA project, that Piedmont Housing would need to do the MACA project, or the $2 million the following year for the Cutler Lane project. All of these things work out fairly reliably to in the neighborhood of $20,000 per unit of affordable housing. If Piedmont Housing is going to do that, they're going to need the help. And typically that help has come from the city. We wouldn't be able to do those projects that we have now approved from a zoning perspective. They wouldn't be able to do those projects without the city's help, and we don't have the ability to help if we're putting all of that money into the school reconfiguration project.
Or even more basic, continuing to offer cost of living raises and or a bit more to city staff.
Also true. I mean, and you know, when we talk about this, some people say, "Oh, it's not fair that you're pitting the schools against affordable housing." That's what a trade-off is.
Right.
Governance is not about solutions as much as it is
compromise.
trade-offs.
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out where the sweet spot is of how much of this, how much of that, how can we keep taxes to a reasonable level, and so and it's all trade-offs. And so when we talk about pitting one against the other, no, you're being pitted against the entire rest of the budget.
Yeah, that's extremely well said. And just because someone is not gung-ho school reconfiguration does not mean that they're anti-closing the educational gap.
Absolutely.
It's just choosing where the limited dollars go. Just because I'm saying maybe reconfiguration should be remodeling instead of reconfiguration doesn't mean I don't want public school kids to get a great education. It just means that I don't want the folks that are on the financial margin to be gentrified out of the municipality.
Well, and to be clear, the real reason why, and I spent a lot of time talking to school people in the last couple of weeks about this, and ultimately got them, I think, to admit that the basic reason for reconfiguration as opposed to renovation comes down not to, gee, we've got a lot of maintenance, because that can always be solved by something short of reconfiguration. And it shouldn't come down to, but we really want to have a nice, bright, shiny school because it's cool. The real problem is that they believe that the decision that was made 30 years ago, or however long ago it was, to have 5th and 6th at Walker, 7th and 8th at Buford, that was a fundamental mistake. And in order to fix that fundamental mistake, it's going to require reconfiguring the schools. Well, let's assume for the moment that that is true. I think we have to be candid with people to say the reason we're doing this is we're fixing a 30-year-old mistake. And it's a mistake that we've seen over the last 30 years that we're just not, the disruption of kids going 4th to 5th, new school, 6th to 7th, new school, 8th to 9th, new school, that those disruptions get in the way of the education of our kids. That's fine. Let's talk about that, but let's not try to say that the result of that is that we're going to, from that, solve the achievement gap. The one thing I've really been encouraged by is that the new superintendent of schools was very clear in saying, we understand that this isn't going to solve the 3rd grade reading problem. And what he then said was, and we have things in place to work on that. That, to me, was the most important message that came out of the discussion that we had last week over school budgets.
And we know he watches the show, the superintendent of schools. I got immediate follow-up questions to this. It seems like, I don't want to assume, that's what I'm asking, perhaps you're cooling a bit on reconfiguration. From what I gathered from Councilor Michael Payne, and I asked him this question in very direct fashion, Councilor Payne did a great job of slightly tiptoeing around the question multiple times. I have tremendous respect for Councilor Payne, who came on the show on Thursday, guys. It seems like you're cooling a little bit on reconfiguration. Certainly Councilor Payne, from the interview that we did on Thursday, seems like he's cooling on it. Brian Pinkston, from, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, he's cooling on it. That looks like a 3-2 on cooling. 5 councilors, 3 maybe cooling. Sina McGill, she mentioned in the joint school board meeting with council, which I believe was last week, she pulled one person, it was her daughter, and utilized that as the foundation for moving forward with reconfiguration. She referenced that in the meeting. Juan Diego Wade campaigned on, he's a former school board member of a decade plus. From a political science standpoint, Wade obviously is going to go yes to reconfiguration. It seems the tea leaves would say McGill's going to go yes to reconfiguration, but it seems like, if I'm reading them correctly, Mayor Snook, Councilor Payne, and Councilor Pinkston are cooling a little bit on it.
Well, let me phrase it a little bit differently. I think that Michael and I, although we're sort of different ends of the political spectrum, at least the spectrum as it is represented on City Council, I recognize that even though I may in some ways be more conservative, I'm still pretty liberal on the national spectrum. But on council, we're sort of the bookends, I guess.
Definitely.
And Michael, his big concern has always been, if we do school reconfiguration, we can't do affordable housing.
Which was his whole campaign.
Right. Right. And so the only way, as he and I have both acknowledged, the only way forward, I think I said 6 months ago, the clearest path forward, so as not to be overly preemptive in the discussion, was the sales tax increase. Without that, it becomes very difficult to see how it all works. Talking with Brian, he is thinking from and of course he's a project manager at UVA. He deals with construction projects all the time. He looks for ways to economize all the time. He thinks there may be a way to get it down to 60, 65 million.
Well, he was referencing like taking away the track around the soccer field in the meeting.
Something.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other things we can do. Just as, for example, when CHS was built, the Performing Arts Center that there is now was an add-on. That wasn't there when the place was built in 1974. And if you've ever wondered why there's this funky little connector between the Performing Arts Center and the rest of the school and the black box and so on, that's why, is because it was added on later. Sometimes that just has to happen, and that might have to happen in this case. But my point is, and I think Michael would agree with me on this, that the issue is not 60 versus 75. The issue is 20 or 22 versus 75 or 60 or something. And it's just very hard to see how the city can move forward on any of its other priorities if the only thing we're doing is building this one school.
I'm total agreement here. So do we utilize? I mean, this platform is reaching a lot of people here. Are we getting the message out that maybe it's time to consider different priorities with this project? Because you're undoubtedly, people look up to you in the city, including me. You're a leader. You're the mayor. You're the mayor here. And while the mayor, as you've identified in multiple pieces, has no more power than other councilors, it still comes with perceived power because it's the word mayor.
Sure.
I would think that citizenship in this community is, I don't want to hyperbolize here, but borderline terrified of these increased taxes because of gentrification when all these other KPIs are happening. These key performance indicators already happen. Inflation, assessments. I mean, Ukraine, Russia is going to drive up gas. We don't even know what's going to happen with that. We all see it's $3.40 a gallon now.
Well, understand that the reason, the closest link for gas prices is the strength of our national economy. And so when we say that gas prices have gone up $1 since Joe Biden came in, that's a reflection on the fact that our economy is doing pretty well. Now, it's really not an issue of inflation per se, because those decisions are the government has the ability to affect gas prices on a 6-year time horizon.
Sure.
Not on a 1-year time horizon. But
this just shows you how smart this guy is. We're pontificating on global issues right here when it comes to gas. To tie to Charlottesville, should we get the message out that you certainly appreciate this I don't want to say bleak situation we're in, but it's borderline a bleak situation with the budget, and maybe it's time to deprioritize reconfiguration?
Well, I mean, it's certainly fair to say, I've said it publicly, that maybe we need to tap the brakes. Let's give it a year. Let's see what the next year brings us in terms of ongoing assessments and so on. Let's see what it brings us in terms of sales tax and whether that issue, whether we're able to make progress on that issue. Here's one problem is that the school folks have told us that their date to move forward, to say, yes, we want to start taking the next steps to be able to begin construction when we want to begin construction, that date is March 23rd. That's before the veto session. That's before the budget and everything coming out of Richmond is going to get clear. And that is also before the city budget gets approved.
And that's before any referendum could become a reality.
Well, sure, but I mean, I'm going to assume
that it's not going to happen.
I'm going to assume that if we are given the approval to have the referendum, that we will be successful in convincing the voters in Charlottesville to support the school.
I agree with that. but I think it is.
But I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to assume that we're going to get things through Richmond.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think with the Republican control that there is now that this makes it through Richmond. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Again, I'm hoping that we can depoliticize it, because I know that there are Republicans who want the same power. They want the ability for their jurisdictions to have the same power, and that's why the bill that has moved forward out of the Senate, 28-12, which includes at least 7 Republican senators, that bill would apply to every locality. Every locality would have the ability to do that. And the reason why is because we have not been able to get a statewide consensus on how the state would help with school construction. The state has said that it regards it as an important thing, but the state has never put $1 to that.
Jim Hingley watched the program routinely.
Yep.
He's given me permission to offer this perspective on the show. Text message, Commonwealth's Attorney of Albemarle County. Tremendous respect, this show, for Jim Hingley. We would be having a very different conversation on school reconfiguration if the Republicans would allow Charlottesville to impose a 1% sales tax for school construction. This issue should be nonpartisan, but Republicans have made it partisan. He alludes to, he also says Republicans are pro-choice for masks, but anti-choice when it comes to allowing Charlottesville citizens to choose to add 1% sales tax for school construction. Sally Hudson, he says, had a bill to give Charlottesville a chance to levy a 1% sales tax for school construction. This would kick in only if approved by a referendum. 5 Republicans killed this bill in subcommittee. The sales tax would be far preferable to real estate tax increase.
I agree. I mean, that's basically what I've been saying for the last half hour. But let me talk a little bit about the politics of it, because we know, as I said a few minutes ago, we know that there are Republicans who want that power to be able to levy that tax so that gives their locality a way forward. You look at all of the huge needs in this Commonwealth for building new schools. I mean, when the Fluvanna County High School was built, that wound up being, $100 million or something like that? And it caused people in Fluvanna to raise a huge uproar. And ultimately, they went ahead and did it. And it's apparently, I mean, it's a beautiful school. I've been there. But it's a problem that is not just afflicting cities, and it's not just afflicting democratic jurisdictions. It's afflicting all jurisdictions where we have not had a serious effort for school reconstruction or school construction in decades, generations, in fact.
We'll get to some comments here. Neil Williamson, president of the Free Enterprise Forum. Charlottesville had by far the highest per capita spending of any locality in the study, $4,975,000 in fiscal year 2020. Interestingly, this was down nearly $900 from an inflation-adjusted $5,874 in 2009, and he includes a link to a Free Enterprise Forum study that was a white paper that he puts out, and his white papers are fantastic. We encourage anyone to check out the Free Enterprise Forum. That white paper is in the comment section of my Facebook page, and it's titled Choices and Decisions, the Free Enterprise Forum Local Government Spending Index.
Let me offer one caution about that kind of study. And I appreciate Neil and his research, and I've relied on it in many instances. But it is often difficult to try to draw parallels or comparisons between the various jurisdictions. I'll give you an example. The cities of Manassas and Manassas Park have real estate tax rates of like $1.40 as compared to our 95 cents. But they've also got meals tax revenues, or they've all got meals tax rates of like 4%. It doesn't actually result in more money for them. I mean, they've got more real estate than they've got restaurants. But the balance that they have struck and the balance that we have chosen to strike may end up with us coming out to the same number or close. So trying to pick bits and pieces from some of these data sources gets a little bit difficult. You have to look at it in a much more holistic way sometimes.
Sure. Carol Thorpe, this is revenue sharing and the merging of municipalities. Is it time for revision of the city of Charlottesville into Albemarle County? Is it no longer tenable, affordable to operate two separate school systems, police departments, governments, etc.? Instead of reversion, she means, excuse me, on that, Carol. I mean, you're a city guy. I would imagine you're opposed to this perspective.
Well, I think, first of all, reversion is possible if the city is less than 50,000 people, which
it is.
I'm not sure that it is.
2020, okay, so 2022.
I'm not counting the census. The census shows us as being
46,000 and change.
Right. If you ask Weldon Cooper, they would say it's over 50. They would say that there is a severe undercount, particularly of people, university students,
because of COVID.
And I haven't looked at the statute recently enough, but I suspect that they would rely on Weldon Cooper data. But that's neither here nor there. So if we did a reversion of some sort, and we were to then get into the business of drawing boundaries for everything, the city would be roughly 40% of the combined city-county. If we had a board of supervisors of the new Albemarle County or of the new city of Charlottesville, however you want to characterize it, it would probably have to be 9, 10, 11 or so members. The city, when we last talked about this 30, 40 years ago, the city was very Democratic, the county was pretty Republican.
Now they're identical.
Now it's pretty close.
Yeah.
So I don't think there would be quite as much pressure as there was before, or people saying in the county, good Lord, no way I want the city polluting our Republican majority here. And the city would not sit there and say, we don't want to be beholden to those county aristocrats. I'm not sure that would be the same this day.
So are you saying or alluding to that reversion is something we should be discussing?
I certainly wouldn't say likely. Okay, I would say if somebody wants to discuss it, it would be an interesting conversation to have, and I wouldn't be opposed to having the conversation. But I'm not sure that I'm a fan of it. As with most things, I'd like to know more.
Because from a businessman's perspective, then you could have the same school bus system, schools on the same budget. You wouldn't be negotiating against each other to keep teachers. Same police force. 11 people, 5 on council, 6 on county, and leadership representing their own various jurisdictions or wards. I mean, it's not the craziest of ideas.
No, it's not the craziest of ideas. I will tell you that if you talk to folks in the county right now, the major concern that they would have is they've seen the chaos in city government, and they're thinking, why on earth would we want to be a part of that?
Well, I mean, the built-in efficiencies we've both identified would help from a taxpayer standpoint. How does the budget challenges impact the city's AAA bond rating? So
far, not at all. So far, one of the things that has been really sacrosanct out of all of this is
the bond rating.
Is the bond rating, because understand that the difference between a AAA and even a AA bond rating
is massive.
We're talking about millions of dollars a year in debt service difference. So it's absolutely crucial that we keep that AAA bond rating, and the way that we do that is, number one, by reassuring the rating agencies that we are serious, that we know, we understand the economic trends we're facing. B, that we have a plan to deal with them. C, that we're keeping certain management controls, certain ratios in line. One of the ratios, and here's one of the other problems with the reconfiguration project. If we do the reconfiguration project on schedule, funded by something other than this sales tax increase, then by the year 2029, I think it is, our debt service rises to a level that would concern the bond rating agencies. So we don't want to be embarking on a course of action where we can look 5 years, 6 years down the road and say it's going to cost us.
Jojo Robertson, can we do anything about the Dewberry Hotel to drive revenue?
I know that there are discussions by people other than me.
Is that counselors?
No.
Okay.
On the private side. There have been discussions of things that might happen to get something going with the Dewberry Hotel. If there is a role for the city to play, I can assure folks that there is a strong majority on council wanting to do something to help.
Because, we posted something about this on social over the weekend that obviously got traction. Dewberry Bloomberg dubbed him the Emperor of Empty Lots. We've pivoted that moniker to the extorting Emperor of Empty Lots. He's paying his real estate taxes, though. And
$65,000 a year.
$65K. It's nominal.
Right.
Nominal. But to Dewberry's point, and I'm not standing up for Dewberry. I think there's nothing that's more hideous about the downtown mall than the Dewberry Hotel. I am not standing up for Dewberry. But the guy's paying his real estate taxes, and structural engineers have assessed the property and said it's structurally sound.
Right.
So blighted,
we have no
you have no
authority.
course of action.
Right.
Is that fair?
There is nothing we can do as long as the building isn't endangering anybody else, and as long as he's paying his taxes. People have said, well, why don't you just go ahead and use eminent domain? Well,
you can't.
You really can't.
Yeah.
And even if we did, we'd have to pay him market value for it. And where are we going to find that money? So I think that the answer is that we need to continue to try to encourage Mr. Dewberry to do something about it. If there are ways that we can encourage that more pragmatically, happy to do that.
So does that mean tax incentives? And does that get back to our moniker, the extorting Emperor of Empty Lots, that keeps the property so blighted and hideous?
I haven't talked to him. I don't know.
Okay. Because I would think that would be the extent of what you could do is, and Neil says property owners have rights, even property owners you don't like. And he's exactly right.
Right, absolutely.
He's exactly right. So I would think that the only way we can motivate Mr. Dewberry of Atlanta, Georgia, former quarterback of the Georgia Tech Rambling Wreck, who grew up in Waynesboro, Virginia, the only way we can motivate him to do anything with this property, because he's already promised it would happen after his Charleston hotel was finished. And the Charleston hotel's been done for some time. But the only way we can incentivize him is by saying tax incentives here, and you have a time constraint of this to get these incentives. Is that the only leverage you all have?
Let me just say, stay tuned.
Okay, so I have to ask a follow-up to this.
And I'm not going to be able to give you any detail.
All right.
But my guess is in the next few weeks there will be something happening that you will want to say, that's kind of cool.
Okay. So Lloyd, in our business, Mayor Snook, in our business, that's called a teaser.
That's right.
Was that a tease of what's on the horizon?
I know that there are folks who are working with Mr. Dewberry on the private side. I don't know where that's going to lead, but I expect at this point something will happen within the next month.
Okay, I got to say this. Media that's watching, Neil Williamson that's watching, that's potentially breaking news right there. And we'll leave it at that. And I have too much respect for this man to continue to push on this topic. But it seems like, and there's no one more connected than Mayor Snook on this.
Just understand, this is not the folks who are working on downtown Charlottesville things, and there are a lot of people who work downtown who have the desire for the downtown situation to improve. Some of whom are willing to put substantial amounts of their own money into making it happen. Some of them have been trying to move these various balls forward. I don't know that the city has done anything at this point. I don't know whether, certainly they haven't been doing it through me, but then there's no reason they ought to be doing it through me. I'm just saying, we've known for a long time that one of the things that is important to the Dewberry folks is that trivialize this, but it's a matter of simple respect. That the vote in 2017 was essentially a stab in the back.
Well, and I hate to bring this up here, but and this is me saying this is not you saying this. Mayor Mike Signer at the time led a charge to negotiate a parking agreement with the Water Street parking garage.
Right.
And that parking agreement with Mayor Signer at the time really motivated and incentivized Mr. Dewberry to do something with this project, specifically a high-end hotel. And if memory serves correct, now Councilor Michael Payne got involved with that and convoluted that agreement to the point of it dematerializing.
Well, and a little more history. In March of 2017, Council had given preliminary approval by a 4-to-1 vote for this project, for this deal to go through.
The parking agreement.
A parking agreement. Also, there was going to be some rebate on taxes for the first 10 years or something like that. A partial rebate, not a complete, but some discount on it, basically while the hotel got up and running. Come now to December of 2017, and the vote is coming up for what I think everybody thought was going to be a routine reaffirmation of the earlier March vote. And at that time, for some reason, instead of being 4-to-1 in favor, Councilor Bellamy,
Dr. Wes Bellamy,
and Bob Fenwick both changed their votes. And I've gone back and I've watched the video again, and Mayor Signer is thinking, surely, it
was a slam dunk.
It was a slam dunk that Kathy Galvin made the motion, and he was fully expecting, as had happened 9 months earlier, that Councilor Bellamy, or Vice Mayor, I guess at that point, Bellamy, or Bob Fenwick would second it. Nobody seconded it. And finally, Mike said, well, I'll second it myself, which, of course, he can do, but it's kind of not the way it gets done most of the time. And then there was no discussion. There was no explanation of why Wes Bellamy or Bob Fenwick changed their votes. They just voted no. And at that same meeting, when it was on the docket, on the agenda, then Councilor-elect Nakia Walker stood up and made made a speech or something, a comment about it. Michael Payne was very much against the deal, and there was it was really being drawn as an equity issue.
That's exactly how I remember it.
Why are you giving breaks to this rich, out-of-town white guy at a time like this? And that was also, if I remember correctly, was also the meeting when that day it was announced that Al Thomas, the police chief, was resigning under pressure, presumably. And so it was a very emotionally fraught meeting. And to have this thing happen at the end of 2017, as two of the councilors are going off, their parting shot, was a stab in the back. And it was a stab in the back to the Dewberry folks who had been negotiating in good faith with the city, expecting that they had the deal done. You don't bring that up. If you're one of the councilors who's going to change your mind, you ought to at least call up the mayor and say, I don't want to blindside you with this, but I got to tell you, I'm changing my vote, and if you bring it up, it's going to go down to defeat. That didn't happen. And so the Dewberry folks absolutely have a right to feel they got stabbed in the back, because they did.
Wow. So the Dewberry Hotel was the collateral damage of social unrest, social justice, and the fallout of August 12th, in some ways, is what you're saying.
In some ways. I mean, all of the tensions and all of the
because that was
anger.
The most dysfunctional council, arguably in the history. one of the most dysfunctional councils arguably in the history. That was when we know now that Signer was through burner email addresses contacting staff writers at the Progress about dynamics on council. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
So that was a council that undoubtedly did not like each other.
No, it was a mess. No question.
I have to ask this follow-up question. You know I have tremendous respect for you, sir. Is the Friends of CVille and Michael Kaplan's 501c3 that are leading the charge with Dewberry?
I know they're involved. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who's exactly doing what.
Too much respect to follow up. All right. So Ray Cadell's watching. I remain impressed. I continue to remain impressed with Mayor Snook, sir. And you got multiple. You got a paper and 2 TV stations watching you here. I give that to you as a heads up. Man, this is a fantastic interview here. So, seriously, Mayor Snook. All right, so why don't we do this? What do you want? What is the message you want to get out? Because I'm mindful of your time here. What's the message you want to get out to Charlottesville citizens about the 10-cent real estate tax rate increase that's been advertised?
Right.
You can't go higher than 10 cents. You can go lower than 10 cents. By law, it has to stay in the paper for 30 days, which would lead us to early March when the 30 days expires. The message you want to get out to folks about this?
The message I would want to get out is, first of all, no decision has been made. Second, that we won't really have a good idea of what we're talking about until we see the city manager's budget. And that's not going to be till the first week in March. So at that point, we would look at it, because one of the things the city manager's got to do is, if he's going to say, okay, I've got now $9 million more that they want me to deal with, because it's required not only that you propose the tax increase, but that you propose what you're going to do with the tax increase. He's going to have to come out with a budget that would meet those expectations. And if he's going to say, that extra 10 cents, if we did it, here are the things we would want to do. Boom, 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 boom. Then we can look at it and say, all right, as I look at these, the only ones out of here that I think are important are 2 and 7, and the rest go away. And that's the kind of thing that, if we're doing our jobs correctly, we will spend our time in March trying to do. One of the things that's been enormously frustrating to me in the last couple of years, of course, I came in 2020, in March of 2020, just as the budget season was getting fired up, wham, we get hit by COVID. We immediately make the decision, no new spending, everybody's on the same budget you were on the year before. 2021, again, we're still in the middle of COVID. We still have no real clue. We're going month by month trying to feel out what the revenue picture is going to be. No new spending. We haven't had to actually make a serious budget decision in 2 years. One of the things that I have said that I want to make sure we've got is, when we see the city manager's budget, I want to see what I'll term the bubble list. What was on the bubble? What did you not fund? What were the last $1 million or $2 million that you did fund? I want to see, because the issue is going to be fought over a couple million here, a couple million there. It's not going to be fought over, with the exception of the issue about the reconfiguration. It's not going to be fought over $10 million more or less for the police department, for example. That's not where the budget discussion is going to go in March and in April. I want to see that list. I want to see what people are suggesting as the most important incremental changes we can make. This is not going to be a budget year, I don't think, for major sweeping changes. We've got too many uncertainties.
So we take police defunding off the table completely?
I would.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, even the police, even most of the people who have talked about defunding the police, what they're most interested in, when it comes right down to it, and I got over 2,500 emails on this last, 2 years ago, when we talked about defunding the police, and I wrote back to probably 500 different people.
They want a change in mindset, as opposed to defunding.
Yeah, and what they wanted more than anything else was the mindset change, was the decision to have a mental health professional respond to a mental health crisis, not a police officer. And so, although we did get some people saying, no, damn it, when I say defund, I mean defund. most people said, well, not defund, just kind of reprogram a little bit. And it may be that we're talking about $1 million or $2 million tops. I don't know. That's a discussion we've never had. And every time I tried to start that conversation over the last 2 years, I got shut down. So maybe we'll be able to have the discussion now.
Well, and if you talk to if you speak to stakeholders in historically African American communities or under-resourced communities, they do not. The last thing these communities want is less boots on the street.
Right.
And that's been covered very well in this program and this network. Now, another thing I should emphasize is there's a number of openings in the police department. If those openings do get filled with human capital, with bodies, won't the budget go up?
The budget already includes those amounts.
Understood. Okay. So is there a buffer then being reserved because there's openings?
I wouldn't say it's a buffer being reserved. I would say that simply if we don't fill them all, there will be some money left over. Okay. And that would come at, we would recognize that at the end of the year. However, we also, I think, understand that if the budget pool is, if the personnel salaries pool is, I don't know, pick a number, $13 million or something, that if we don't have all of the full complement of officers, there may be some more merit increases that can be given to some other people. I don't know how that's going to work. Here's the other thing. We're looking at the possibility of collective bargaining for police
officers.
And
teachers.
Well, I'm just talking about police for right now, but yeah, teachers and transit workers and firefighters. But police officers are talking about it also, and almost any kind of collective bargaining agreement that we would end up with is likely to end up with some kind of a step system for regular raises in some systematic way, and that's new territory also. So if you want to look at things that are going to take the first $1 million or first $2 million of any additional revenues, that would be one of them, trying to implement a collective bargaining system. We don't even have the employees in City Hall that we would need to implement a collective bargaining system. So that's why I've said earlier on, there's kind of the organizational nitty-gritty kinds of inside baseball issues that will never see the street, but have to be dealt with. And that's where, if we're going to be spending money, if we're going to be spending more money this coming year, that's where it's going to be.
He's referencing the nuanced elements of leadership. And some are better at those nuanced elements than others. And I think Mayor Snook is extremely good at those nuanced elements. I'll wind down the interview here with just a couple more questions from your constituents here, Mayor Snook. This one's from Kevin Higgins. It's an intriguing one. Mayor Snook, can you describe a situation where you think you can move forward outside of normal protocols, policy, or procedures and decide, quote, this is what we are going to do, end quote?
I'm not sure what he's getting at.
He's getting at, you are a common sense guy. And I've said this so many times, that you are a common sense guy. And in the Charlottesville ecosystem of government and Republican, while you're a Democrat, you are a moderate in a town like this. You may be more, you are liberal, maybe from a countrywide definition, but in a town like this, you're moderate. And you're shaking your head in agreement here. Can you utilize that moderate common sense thinking in ways that are outside protocols or policy or normal procedure?
Well, what I'm going to be trying to do is to talk with counselors individually. We talk a lot, and I will say we talk more on this council than we did on the last council. And there are lots of conversations going on, and I think I have a better sense of where each counselor stands on most of these issues. Many more conversations to be had. I will continue to try to work with other counselors to get them to understand some of the practical concerns that I've got, and I'm sure they will get me to understand the practical concerns that they've got. The one thing I will say about all five of us, I think this is a very smart group. This is a group that thinks deeply. This is a group that hasn't yet thought collectively. it's hard for us to think collectively in a FOIA-centric world where we can't all just sort of get together. And,
where you guys weren't communicating.
Well, certainly, the last couple of years it wasn't happening at all, and now it's happening a lot more, and I'm very encouraged by that. And the other thing I want to point out was something that came up as we were finding our interim city manager, Mike Rogers, who I think is a very, very good choice, but that's a digression. Is that the point was made to us that Charlottesville, if you ask people nationwide or statewide, what do you think of Charlottesville? Their impression of Charlottesville is far more positive than our impression of our own city. We see all these problems. They see a reservoir of good feeling, of hey, it's home of the University of Virginia and Monticello, and the weather is great, and all these positives that they tend to associate with Charlottesville. Best place for hiking and all the other cool things that are going on. That's a reservoir of goodwill that we can build on, and it's a reservoir of branding potential that is still going to be there. I am very optimistic about that.
I mean, thank you for joining us. I agree and concur with you. You have multiple people saying on the feed that this guy is the right mayor for the job. And I've been a proponent of Councilor, now Mayor Snook, since his election. And the folks we have, this guy is the North Star for the climate we're in. How about you close on this? Will this budget decision, and you've said on the past that you don't reflect on legacy. Okay. I somewhat believe you on that, okay? Because I think you're a man who thinks of everything. And I'm sure you think of how you will be known in the town that you grew up in and that you love dearly.
I won't be here when that happens.
Well, you think of everything. You're a holistic thinker.
My legacy is Christopher, Michael, and Elizabeth.
I figured you would say that. And despite what you have identified in previous meetings as bathtub brain, where you fill up the brain with all the knowledge you need for decision making, and then once that decision is done, you let the drain out, and all that stuff goes out to the next decision. I still think you consider legacy and how Lloyd Snook will be remembered. Do you think that this budget, when you reflect, when you're having coffee at the Nook or saving people from jail time at the Snook law firm over here, do you think this budget time is going to be the most difficult, impactful time of decision making of your 4 years on council?
There are a lot of difficult decisions that we're having to make right now, and part of the reason why they're difficult is that they involve priorities that I have long held dear being traded off against each other. I think that there is a way forward, kind of a narrow path through, that keeps everything kind of moving along until the financial picture resolves. I think we're a couple of years away from the financial picture resolving. And in the meantime, what we need to do is not do something stupid. We need to keep moving along on that narrow path. It's not a time for big gestures. It's a time for little gestures that keep us going in the right direction. That's the way I look at it.
Well said. Your best interview yet, sir. Mayor Snook, thank you for joining us.
Glad
I
to be here.
sincerely mean that. Thank you for joining us. Guys, we'll offer I see at least it looks like 22 comments on the feed here, maybe 23 that are asking where this interview is going to be archived in totality. It's archived on every social media platform known to mankind. And if you want to go to ilovecville.com and get the interview, it's there. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever it may be, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, every platform possible. I respect him tremendously and appreciate his straightforwardness. We will assess today's interview on tomorrow's edition or episode of the I Love CVille Show at 12:30 p.m. There was a lot that I'm going to listen on the playback and digest and take notes upon, and then bring some takes to you tomorrow. For Mayor Snook and Judah Wickhauer, my name is Jerry Miller, and this is the I Love CVille Show. Take care, guys. Mayor Snook.